Hi everyone. So whenever we talk about pronunciation, everyone has been talking about the practices like shadowing or dubbing. So basically repeating after native speakers in videos to improve our pronunciation. So I wonder how far along these practices have taken you. So in today's video, I want to talk about my opinions on these practices and my recommended ways for you to approach English pronunciation. So the two common practices we've often seen online are shadowing and dubbing. So basically in both practices, we repeat what the native speakers say in the videos. So after taking a closer look at these two practices, I have found out some problems. First, we can often manage to kind sound like the native speakers, but when we stop the practice, we usually go back to sounding exactly the way we did before. Also, we might find it extremely difficult to achieve that fluency until we become really familiar with the material. Which means when we're speaking English in our daily conversations, we still cannot achieve that fluency or that same intonation that we just spent 2 hours of our day practicing. Because obviously you're not going to be talking about the same things. And third, perhaps even after spending hours and hours doing these two practices or other similar ones, we're still confused about the phonetic phenomena in the English language, like stress, intonation, as well as connected speech processes like linking, assimilation, elision, and so on. And that's because even though we have been learning bits here and there about pronunciation, we still don't have a systematic understanding of why the English language is pronounced this way. So we often end up sounding quite forced and unnatural. And last but not least, sometimes we end up learning the rhythm outside the context. So what I meant by that is when we're trying to speak after and imitate the native speaker in the video, if we don't have a good understanding of the context where the sentence is being said, we often fail to establish the connection between the particular context and the particular way the native speaker talks in. And a lot of times we leave out their personal preferences and styles of speech as well. As we know, each one of us, even when speaking Chinese, we have our own styles and preferences, and we have to take that into consideration when we're trying to imitate a native speaker of English as well. So how should English pronunciation be approached? Here are some tips that I think you might find very helpful. First, start from the basics. Like I have repeated so many times in my previous videos. Focus most of your energy on the vowels and consonants at the beginning. And speaking from my own experience, 80 to 90% of the progress will happen when you are improving your pronunciation of the vowels and consonants. And we have to make sure that we now have a good grasp of the pronunciations of the sounds before we move on to other elements of the English pronunciation. So things like intonation, stress, and connected speech. For example, in the phrase green apple, a lot of us tend to focus our energy on whether or not I should connect the N sound at the end of the word green and the at sound at the beginning of the apple. But just imagine if you can't even pronounce the green, the E sound correctly, or the at in the apple sound. Does it even make sense for you to worry about connecting the N and A sound? Of course not. Because when I say it like green apple, you know exactly what I'm referring to. And the proper pronunciations of the vowels and consonants in these two words are way more important than the other elements that you might be focusing on. So trying to figure out how to properly pronounce all these sounds should be your primary task when you approach English pronunciation. Second, always make sure to invest time in repetitive practice. We always want to start with practicing one sound at a time. Try to practice over and over again once you've learned the proper techniques, where to put your tongue, how your lips should look like, and how it feels on your tongue, as we know a lot of the sounds in English involve the use of our tongue. Try to practice pronouncing the sound by itself first until you get comfortable with it, and then practice it in a word before gradually moving on to practicing it in a sentence. And catch yourself when you realize you're pronouncing a certain sound wrong once you start to practice, and correct yourself. Maybe even record yourself from time to time and focus on correcting this one sound you're currently practicing. You will be very surprised at how easy it is for you to just go back to your old way of pronouncing it. So it takes a lot of time and patience for you to get rid of your old pronunciation, which you probably have been doing for the past decade or so. And also, give it time. As we all know, it takes a long time to get rid of a habit, especially one that we've had for a really long time. The key thing here is to become mindful of it and correct yourself at every chance you get. Gradually, you will get it right more and more often, and eventually it will just become your natural way of pronouncing them. And the third tip is focus on your own progress. It's very easy for us to compare ourselves to other people online or even to native speakers. And trust me, it's not going to do anything for you except for making you anxious or discouraged. Anytime that you feel like that, please know that we can only take one step at a time. And our vowels and consonants will take a lot of time for us to correct. But once that part is done, everything else will be easy peasy. And we also need to remind ourselves to stay on track. It's common that we might start to pay attention to other elements in the pronunciation when we're still working on our vowels and consonants. So sometimes we might get distracted and even frustrated because it just feels like there's so much to learn. But always remind yourself that you will have a lot more time to work on these other aspects of the English pronunciation once you get through the first stage. And another thing I want to point out is that great pronunciation doesn't equal fast talking. And I don't think it should be our goal to be able to talk very fast. What we want instead is to be able to express ourselves clearly and fluently. To achieve this, we should be very mindful of the pace of our practice. Sometimes I find we focus too much on being able to talk fast that we overlook the importance of enunciation. It's more effective for us to practice how to pronounce each sound clearly and correctly than simply trying to get through the practice and mark it as complete. For me, it took me a little over 2 years to correct about 70 to 80% of my pronunciation, and then years after that to continue working on it. And like I've mentioned so many times in my videos, the magic often lies in the most basic and simple practice that everyone knows about, but most are unwilling to spend the time on.